Hello everyone, it's the Historical Gamer. Once again, you can call me Matt, and I'm here today with Jean. How are you doing today?
Not bad, man. What's going on? How's your summer going?
I'm doing well, and I'm excited because we're back here for another episode of Single Malt Strategy, our podcast that looks at strategy and wargaming, and we're up to episode 15. It's been a little bit of a, this is largely my fault, but it's been a little bit of a back and forth kind of run with the podcast, but I'm having a good time. I hope you are, and we're up to 15 episodes now.
15, nice. So we got to do something special for number 20.
Well, I don't know what that'll be, but depending on how timing works out, we actually...
How about for episode 20, we reverse the role. Since I always get the beers, you try an IPA for episode 20, and I flip over to Scotch.
Will you actually drink the Scotch? Like, do I have to send it to you, or...
I will actually drink the Scotch.
Okay. The other thing is episode 20 could end up being around the 1 year mark. Our first episode came out on August 29th of 2016, and we're recording this episode here kind of in the middle of July, so probably will be a little bit after the 1 year mark, but it'll be close to our 1 year anniversary as we kind of get toward the big 20.
Be around the time of be around the time Battlestar Galactica comes out from Slitherine.
Oh wait, do you know when it's coming out? Do you have insider knowledge that you're not sharing?
No. I saw it on. I think it was a press release they released or something like that. That August was the where they're attending, because they said summer, so it's already the end of July or mid-July, so August is the last month. So I think I saw it a couple of days ago where they
smooth
said...
cover there, smooth cover.
No, I mean, I remember seeing it in a press release, though. I believe. If not, then people at Slitherine are going to hurt me. But,
all I saw was summer,
which press release though.
All I saw was summer, which, given we're toward the end of July and they haven't announced a date yet, I mean, August is probably a pretty fair guess.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not really looking forward to it. I mean, I called my couple of guys I know is at Slitherine. They said they're working really hard on it, and I mean, I told them, I said, it's going to be a spectacular game when it comes out. I'm really looking forward to it, and my Battlestar Galactica verbiage has increased dramatically. So if I say frack a couple of times, just please ignore it.
I mean, that's all cool, but I don't. Can you really say your vocabulary has increased if you're just talking about the word frack? Like, isn't that the one word that everybody knows?
Well, I'm trying to also include things like toaster, but there's not too much, I can really use that in modern day. We don't have actual robots walking around yet, but
right. Well, I mean, we're not that far away.
No, at least we have the word waiting for them when they start moving around. I'm like, damn toaster, get out of my way,
So, what have you been up to lately?
So honestly, the last couple of days I've been hitting up some Ultimate General Civil War because it just hit version 1.0, so vanilla release. And I've noticed you played. I think it was in Malvern or Gainesmill or Malvern Hill.
Yeah, that was recorded from before the 1.0 version came out. So that was a video that I posted, but it was actually like the .96, the last of the pre-beta launches, if you will.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but I noticed something in this current version which was really cool, and maybe it's because I haven't played it in a couple of weeks. But so in the Gettysburg scenario, I noticed I had Meredith and Cutler, and they were split up into individual regiments. Then I had Baxter and division and a couple other brigades coming in, and they were 1,700 men, while Cutler's and Meredith's were broken up into a couple hundred each. And I was about to complain. I was like, man, I wish I can combine this unit back into a brigade again. And I actually did that. I selected 2 or 3 of them and it said combine unit. So is this just a recent addition to the game? Because I was like, holy shit, this is pretty cool. I can combine the brigade back together again.
You've been able to combine brigades into a larger formation. And then I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe you've been able to undo that as well. So combine 2 brigades into a larger formation and then split them back apart into the respective brigades. That's been around for a while.
Oh, okay. Maybe I just
it's
didn't see
limited
that.
to certain units though, so like you can't your units have to be part of the same division, so you can't combine just any two brigades. They've actually got to share the same command tree, if you will, which makes a lot of sense if you think about it. Like if you're trying to have it kind of simulates, all right, there's an organizational level above the brigade, which the game kind of simulates, and you hear about like, oh, so and so's been wounded, or in your kind of between battle phases, you've got that whole tree of officers, but it actually helps bring that to life a little bit, I think, by allowing you to combine brigades and use them in tandem, but again, only if they're part of the same division.
Let me ask you, what happens to the commanders if you combine like two brigades? Which commander gets the command? Do you get to choose?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I would think it would be the division commander that would show up. You would see the division commander's portrait and stats, but I'm not quite sure how that works.
That'd be cool if you can kind of like choose which one would be able to take command.
There's no choice. I know that. I mean, you don't get like a pop-up that says like, hey, who do you want to take command? Like it doesn't do that. But I think it relies more heavily on the division commander's traits and stats. Because even though you don't see division commanders in game, they're still simulated there, and troops get perks or bonuses, and they can be wounded or killed or things like that. So they're there. They're just kind of invisible
to the nether regions. So yeah. I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about? So one idea that I had was like when I combined Cutler's brigade, which was split up into 4 or 5 regiments, whatever it was, and I combined them back into a brigade. I noticed. I thought this was going to be a really cool idea if I could break them back up into regiments. Like, it would be really cool if I could take every brigade in the game and then break them up into individual regiments, because I noticed I could split the regiments to guard a larger portion of the field. Like, Meredith, I had basically guarding the entire north end of Seminary Ridge, all the way to where the 11th Corps met him. And
were you splitting skirmishers off him, or how were you doing that?
Well, currently, like Meredith in Gettysburg, when you get him, has 4 or 5 regiments. Correct me if I'm wrong, but and I was able to connect from the road. I forgot what road it is. Damn it, should know this. I go to Gettysburg like 5 times a year. But
I'm just going to throw one out here: the Emmitsburg Pike.
Yes,
is it that, or is it the Tawny Town something?
Yeah,
but I was able Turnpike.
I was able to control like a larger amount of, because I got to spread the regiments out a little bit more, and I was able to control a lot more of Seminary Ridge than if I just had the entire brigade as one big whole. So I really thought it would be a really good idea if I can take a brigade, like 11th Corps, 2nd Corps, whatever, take one brigade and just split up. And then from there, it would split up into individual regiments that I can set up, anywhere I want on the battlefield. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I'm not surprised you feel that way. It's not meant as a dig or anything, but if we think back in every one of our episodes, I think every single one of them at some point involves you wanting more control over your own forces so that you can kind of micromanage every little aspect of your command. And while
I feel a little bit of control freak.
Maybe a little bit within war games. I don't think you're unique by any means, by the way, within the wargaming community. I think that's very common, and I think that's why you see a lot of games sometimes go overboard in terms of the number of decisions you can make, the amount of micromanaging you can do. Sometimes they even have pick your own rules. Like, who knows? Make the game you want to make. And I don't know. I guess maybe it would be fine. I don't think it's necessary for this game. I think the game playing at the brigade level kind of leaves the right amount of abstraction in place, in my opinion, which makes you think about things from a larger scale, think about things from a sort of corps or division or army level, rather than the more minute level. I think when you get into the regiments, it depends on the scenario, right? The 3-day battle of Gettysburg, if you're simulating it the way that you do in Ultimate General Civil War, where things kind of move along at a brisk pace, and you've kind of got this 3-day multi-phased setup, looking at the entire battlefield all at once, I think regiment level would be one level too low. It would really get a little bit overwhelming. I don't think you gain anything by having individual regiments. Maybe in those initial, couple of first hours of the battle on July 1st you would, when your forces are still limited. But frankly, in the game, the way it's set up, you don't need regiments to get the feel and the authenticity of holding on to Little Round Top or Culp's Hill or arraying for Pickett's Charge. I think you add an extra layer of complexity without really gaining any benefit. What I will say is that games like Take Command or Scourge of War, I think they benefit from the regiment perspective, because in general, the scenarios that I feel like they do the best at are the small, mid to smaller size scenarios where you're commanding a brigade, where you're commanding a division. And at that level, individual regiments matter. And very detailed tactical representations of what's happening on the battlefield matter. I'm not convinced when you draw back to an army level, it really matters.
You feel like a good example would be, I understand in July 1st, it comes in useful, possibly not in July. Well, maybe in July 2nd, because I'm thinking like Little Round Top, if you break up a brigade, I forgot, damn, I'm going to kick myself in the ass because I go to Little Round Top so often, I should know the brigade. I believe it was O'Rourke's brigade. If I'm not correct, somebody can kick me in the ass for it. But O'Rourke took his brigade, went to Little Round Top, and angled his brigade with the 20th Maine, at the end of it. And I believe the 147th New York, I'm probably wrong on that. But and you have basically it angled at the left flank, and then he refused the line to even make it more angled. Do you feel like if you have regimental control, if they're, like your enemy's trying to outflank you, you can break up the brigade and then take like maybe one or two regiments and kind of like, refuse the line in a completely new direction. So basically take one brigade and make it like an L kind of shape.
If it was a brigade level scenario or even a division level scenario, yes, but I don't think it matters when you're looking. I mean, there is no specific Little Round Top scenario in Ultimate General Civil War. In Ultimate General Civil War, it is July 2nd, and maybe you're looking at the left flank of the Union Army, and you've got the entire 3rd Corps, the entire 5th Corps, and elements of the 2nd Corps all at your command. And who gives a damn about the 20th Maine? Vincent's out there somewhere with his brigade, and the 20th is part of it, but you really don't care about the 20th Maine. It's just too small of a portion of the battlefield to matter. General Sykes doesn't give a damn about an individual regiment within his corps. General Meade doesn't give a damn about what regiment is on the flank of his corps. Let's demystify Gettysburg a little bit. The senior commanders don't care about an individual regiment and how it's facing. They care that it holds its position, and it needs to do whatever it needs to do to hold that position. And I think the game gives you enough ability to do things like that by, you can split skirmishers off to kind of, screen your forces. So there's elements of that if you really need to do that. But frankly, it's not a brigade level tactical simulation. It's trying to look at the corps and army level. It's looking at the bigger picture, and I think you lose a little bit of that ambiance of the bigger picture if you wade too much into the minutia, because while you're right, it could add a little bit of an atmosphere if you could do that for an individual regiment or brigade and have that kind of capability. It adds absolutely nothing for the entire 3rd Corps stuck out in, the wheat field and the peach orchard and, fighting its way as best as it can against the vast majority of Longstreet's corps exposed out there. There's no, all right, let's refuse this. Like, that doesn't matter in that scenario. It doesn't matter at Pickett's Charge if you've got an individual regiment that's flank is kind of hanging in the air. What matters is how's that brigade doing? How's your artillery batteries doing? How's the division doing? The regimental level is just a layer too deep, if you ask me.
I think there was a couple of instances in day one that I've noticed where being able to bend a brigade, it's like an L shape would help me out, because there was a part where I had Stone's had 2 brigades south of the road of Gettysburg, going into Gettysburg, and I had Stone's brigade, which had about 1,300 men, and I had Gamble's brigade, and he had 400 men, and the Rebs wanted to kind of come around my flank. They were coming out with 1,000 men, and I think Gamble had I forgot how many, a couple hundred, and had him take the heights. He was on like a seminary ridge, and the Rebs are coming out, and I had to move Stone's brigade from their position in line, and I had to move them kind of like in a reverse C, and meet the Rebs front, forwards, right, head on. And I was just thinking, I was like, if I could just bend Gamble's brigade into like an L kind of shape, where if the Rebs go left, they'll hit Gamble, but if they try to like turn my entire line, they're still going to hit Gamble, and he'll be able to hold them just for a little bit, or maybe even for the whole duration of the skirmish. I just got a little annoyed that I had to move an entire 1,300-man unit. I would love to split just a couple of regiments out of that, so Stone's brigade can still hold his position, and just maybe take 2 regiments and make sure my entire left is secured. But I feel like, being able to bend a brigade in certain aspects could be useful. But one question I wanted to ask you was, how do you feel? So when I was playing Ultimate General Gettysburg, I think it was yesterday, while I was playing, I ran into a little thing. I wanted to see your opinion on this. So I had the 1st Corps holding the left flank of the Union Army. I had the 11th Corps holding the right, and I was doing pretty well. I was surprisingly, I thought I was going to cave in.
Drum roll, please, and then Early showed up.
Actually, he did show up. But the weird thing is, I put in there was the border between the 11th Corps and the 1st Corps was very weak. I only had like 1,000 men there, and Early put like 4 brigades there, and he was about to crush me. I put a couple of cavalry regiments in there, and I put all my artillery basically, and just shelled the crap out of Early. And believe it or not, somehow it actually held. And Early just kind of like faded into my line of sight. I was like, holy crap, the line is actually holding. But 30 seconds later, I got a little notification on the screen that says Confederates capture Cemetery Ridge, the main objective. And I'm like, no, they didn't. Are you kidding me? I guarded my flanks. They didn't break. The 11th Corps holding, the 1st Corps holding. Everything is good.
They just marched in behind you?
I thought it was like some kind of cavalry unit that went behind. I didn't even get a chance to find out who it was. And the game said defeat, and the Confederates took a lot heavy losses. I think they took 2 out of 3 men they lost in terms of casualties. And I was thinking, I was like, okay, so the game's going to move on to the next portion, like day 2. And it just went back to the main screen. I'm like, are you kidding me? I can't go forward just because this one little unit took Cemetery Ridge. The whole scenario is that I can't move forward. How do you feel like...
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I will say that is one element that, I know we've probably talked about Civil War, Ultimate General Civil War to death on this podcast. I think we've got like half or more of our podcasts have mentioned it at some point in time or
That's
another.
That's a lot about the game, that it's good, that we keep coming back to it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. It took over my channel for a good 3 months. But what I would say is that, I think that's a level of detail that you lose. Ultimate General Gettysburg, which is obviously the precursor to Ultimate General Civil War. Ultimate General Civil War looks at the entire Civil War, a wide scope of battles, Eastern Theater, Western Theater, Gettysburg Campaign, Antietam Campaign, the Manassas Campaign, Shiloh, etc. Mm-hmm. Ultimate General Gettysburg looks at one battle, and that's the Battle of Gettysburg. What I will say is there's a certain appeal, there's a certain ambiance to that game, because it has like 40-plus scenarios, but they're all the Battle of Gettysburg. So you can build this complex web in Ultimate General Gettysburg. You can build this complex web of scenarios. You took this hill, here's the next scenario. You did worse than history, here's what could have happened. You did better than history, here's what could have happened. The Confederates took Cemetery Hill on day 1. Wow, great. That is, one of the big what-ifs that people think about. Southern sympathizers or Civil War buffs always think in their head, what would have happened if Ewell had pressed hard and taken Culp's Hill and maybe Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill on the night of July 1st? What could have happened? How would the battle have changed? And at the end of the day, Ultimate General Gettysburg lets you live that fantasy, lets you live that what if. Ultimate General Civil War is not set up to do that. There have been numerous battles, Shiloh one of them, where something hasn't gone right for me or has gone better than right for me. and I think, great, what's next? And I basically broke the battle because the game was not set up to model that what if. And that's what I mean. I don't mean break in a bad way. I mean break in the game doesn't have a scenario or a next phase or a next, move by the AI to counter me, so the battle ends. And rather than seeing what happens if the Confederates take Cemetery Hill at the end of July 1st, it just ends up being a Confederate victory for the entire Battle of Gettysburg. Which, who knows, right? That's one of the big what-ifs. What would have happened? Well, it's not a given that the Confederates would have won the battle if that had happened. So, I think that's one thing where when you have a game that looks at a specific battle, like Ultimate General Gettysburg, it gives you more freedom within the confines of the battle than a game like Ultimate General Civil War that looks at the entire Civil War. And it's not a good or a bad thing in my mind. I'm not saying, oh goodness, Ultimate General Civil War should have the level of detail for every battle that Ultimate General Gettysburg does. I don't think that would make sense at all. That would make for a hell of a slog of a game that no one would ever get through. But it is different. And there are times where I kind of wish that I could dig into more of the what-ifs. And Ultimate General Civil War really doesn't touch on the what-ifs. It doesn't. If you look at the battles you fight Manassas. Then you move into the Shiloh campaign. Then you come back for the Peninsula campaign in Virginia. You follow that up with the Second Manassas campaign, followed up by Antietam, followed up by, it might be Murfreesboro, and then Chancellorsville and Gettysburg. It's all linear. It's all based on what really happened. And again, it's not set up to model what-ifs well at all. There's a little bit of variance between battles based on what happened previously, but it's much more like, it's a lot more like Civil War Generals 2 in that way of, Civil War Generals 2 had like 30 or 40 different Civil War battles modeled in that game. And you had this sort of quasi-dynamic campaign where you carried forces across from battle to battle. But at the end of the day, even though there were slight variations in the way the battle was fought, you were still fighting the next historical battle as if nothing had changed. And I think that's where Ultimate General Gettysburg, because it's more focused on one individual engagement, can more authentically capture a what-if scenario, because it doesn't have to worry about, imagine if the Union wins its Second Manassas, what's next? Ultimate General can't figure that out. Civil War, that is. But if the Union wins its Second Manassas, now what? Right? Like, how do you figure out what the next battle is? What the next hypothetical is? Well, in Ultimate General Gettysburg, you don't have to worry about that because you're limited to this one battle, and you can think, well, if the right flank caves in at Culp's Hill for the Union, well, it's pretty clear what's next. There's an advance over Culp's Hill. The Union has to race reinforcements in to secure the flank. Otherwise, the Union is swept from their position. Well, that's very tactical, very isolated to one specific spot in the battlefield. And that's not something that a game like Ultimate General Civil War can really do. But again, I don't think it's a positive or a negative. I think it's just, one game is modeling the whole Civil War and one game is modeling an individual battle, and there's strengths and weaknesses to both approaches.
What do you think about, for example, like the scenarios? I understand the campaign is kind of, like you were saying, linear, and you can't change that gameplay aspect because that was the way the game's constructed. But the scenarios, how do you feel about, like, they give you a scenario like the Battle of Gettysburg, and it's kind of, I remember there was a Sid Meier's scenario for this where you could play the whole 3 days, and they put units on the map as they come into historically, so like, for example, it'll be day 1, and they'll give you Gamble and Devon, and then as time goes on, they'll give you Cutler, Meredith, and Baxter, and the rest of the brigades of the 1st and 11th Corps. I'm not going to pronounce. I remember one of them is Krasinski, and then Smith, whatever that guy's name was. Anyway, but giving you brigades as they come into the battle, but they're giving you the whole map, and you're not limited to completing this objective. I mean, you have objectives in Sid Meier's Gettysburg, but they give you the whole map. These are your objectives. Do with the army what you will. And I really enjoyed that because, like I was saying in one of my gameplay videos, that I remember I put Buford on Cemetery Ridge. Not Cemetery Ridge. I'm sorry. I forgot the name of that ridge that he started out on. my memory is really bad, but basically you started on a ridge there, and then you pulled back to Seminary Ridge. And I had Buford there, and the First Corps was coming up, and Buford was being pulled back. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to do the historical aspect because I know that I'm not going to have enough troops from the 11th Corps. So I just had the First Corps set up positions on Cemetery Ridge, and 11th Corps set up positions between Cemetery Ridge and Culp's Hill. And I just made like a fortress there. I mean, I literally put guns in every direction. I mean, it was the Fort. Well, I was going to say Fort Wagner, but I think that Fort Wagner failed. But anyway, it was a really it was like Fort McHenry. It would never. The flag wouldn't come down, and I really enjoyed that because it gave me the liberty of being able to move units where I wanted them to. And I feel in this game, in Ultimate General Civil War, you have to complete certain objectives. If your enemy takes an objective that, with the small cavalry unit, they take an objective in the far rear that you're supposed to guard, and you're like figuring their main body would never get there because you're holding them at bay, you lose the whole battle. And I feel like, honestly, they could implement version 1.2 or whatever 2.0 in Ultimate General Civil War, where they just give you the whole map. They say, here are the units, and they lay them out in terms of time when they're supposed to show up on the battlefield, and say, go at it. The game is going to end in a certain amount of hours. Have at it. And you create your own type of Gettysburg or Antietam. And you don't have to follow the objectives and be walked through the entire game, where I have to make sure all my objectives are secure in order to get to the next part of Gettysburg. I can create a new type of Gettysburg where, I didn't hold Cemetery Hill or Culp's Hill. I pulled back to Powell's Hill and kind of linked that up with, Little Round Top and created a brand new line. I feel like that kind of freedom would be easy to implement, but also be really cool for the user because honestly, like it gives you that kind of like, what if, you can follow the traditional kind of thing where you can go to Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill and Cemetery Ridge. You can do that, but you can also change it up. And I like that. I wanted to see how would you feel about something like that if they implemented that in version 2.0 or something like that.
I think you're asking for something that would be a whole new game.
Then there'll be like a easy, not easy, but like a patch update where they can say, we're going to add this in.
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. I mean, I know that's kind of your dream game, and believe me, I have my own dream games of things I would like to see. I would love to see a strategic level Civil War game that lets me worry about the production of muskets and the acquisition of manpower and running the blockade and enforcing the blockade, while also allowing me to manage the size of the armies and then actually down to the operational level.
So is that a hint for future developers?
I think the problem is the kind of game that I want wouldn't sell. Like I realize, like if I ever want that game, the level of detail that I would want in it, no, I don't know. I mean, there have been a couple of games that have come close. So there was this old, I want to say it was like American Civil War, like Sumter to Appomattox, which is just this really old game. You've got to worry about the grand strategy. You assign leaders, generals, build weapons, manage the blockade or run the blockade, and then you maneuver armies around and they fight. And it would almost, the only thing it was missing was, one, it was really old and the AI was kind of poor and the UI was not great. But the one thing that it was missing was the tactical battles, which I would love to see. So I think it's kind of similar to what you're talking about, but I also don't think that it's, Ultimate General Civil War in any way. But, interesting you say that, you're talking about sort of a few moments ago, you were talking about positioning your forces, refusing your flank, that kind of thing. And I'm curious, have you had a chance to play Gettysburg-the-Tide-turns yet?
I did. So this game I was really obsessed with. I was probably one of the few people emailing Slitherine like every couple months or every month, be like, hey, what's the status of going on with Gettysburg-the-Tide-turns? And, I have to give extreme props to Slitherine for making this game happen. I was one of the original Kickstarter backers, and I was so hooked on this game. because I really enjoy the Shenandoah Studios, which was the original developer for this game. They made Battle of the Bulge and Drive on Moscow, great iOS games. I really love them. And I even went to Slitherine Studios in 2014 and actually got to interview, the entire team, from the developers, designers, and stuff like that. And I was really motivated about this game. I was really moto about it. And when it started having problems somewhere around mid 2014, because it was supposed to come out, I believe, in that summer. And then there was a little bit of, then there was some news, I think in 2014 or 2015, where Slitherine purchased them. I knew there was some problems in 2014 because the release date, time went past the release date. There was no updates. And then I heard their public affairs guy that I was communicating with left the company. I knew there was some kind of stuff going on. And then Slitherine purchased them and brought the game back to life. And on behalf of me as a Kickstarter and everybody else that put money into it, thank you. Because if that wasn't going to happen, if that didn't happen, I can tell you right now, I would, like right now, I'm very hesitant to invest in Kickstarter, but I'm still kind of willing because the actual investment that I put money into, Gettysburg-the-Tide-turns, actually came out. So I'm grateful for that. But I have been playing it. I do enjoy it. It's a really cool game. The map is beautiful. I gotta, when I first saw the map in 2014, I even told Eric Smith, who was the lead designer of the game and the project lead, I was just like, this is a great map. It's beautiful. They put a lot of time into it. From what he told me originally in 2014, they actually designed the board game first, I believe he was telling me. And then they based the digital game off the board game. And when you play, I've noticed.
Sorry to interrupt you. Is there a actual board game for Gettysburg-the-Tide-turns?
They were supposed to be. When I was at their studios, I actually did play a board game of it. They made like this.
They were going to make like P Ridge and a bunch of other battles too, right?
Yes, exactly. He was actually, when I was at their studio, he took me to that back room. He says, these are the games that, this is the game that we have planned after Gettysburg. And P Ridge was one of them. And I was like, oh, crap, this is awesome. So you got to have future games based on this model. And one thing I'm wondering if they're still going to still develop those kind of games like P Ridge. But I guess that depends on if this game sells well.
Yeah, and I almost wonder, the game is priced right. It's only $9. So that's a fair price. But I almost feel like this is one of those games that there's not a ton of scenarios. You can play through it pretty quick. It's a lot of fun. For $9, it's a good deal. But I just wonder how much runway there is there for other additional games beyond that when you're pricing it so low to begin with. And this is Gettysburg is the one game that's going to, get your name out there and sell a bunch of copies. And P Ridge people are going to be like, what the fuck is that? If we're being honest, outside of the war game community specifically. So I would hope that the way that Gettysburg is built literally is as easy as switching out the map and a couple of, differently scripted scenarios, and there you're good to go. And now we can sell it for $5.99 or something. And
when he, exactly what you were saying, when he showed me P Ridge, I was just like, I was just like, oh, P Ridge. He was like, yeah. And it was just like, I don't know if you're familiar with it. I was like, no, not really. I know it's in.
I know of the battle, but it's a little bit disingenuous to call it the Gettysburg of the West.
I think he mentioned that he wanted to design that battle, include that battle, because I think one of his answers, his original family members was involved in that battle. I think he mentioned something like that when I was
okay. That's kind of cool. I'm not going to dismiss that. If you want to build a game, but let's just be honest that it's not going to resonate with people or sell copies. So I almost kind of wondered why wouldn't they just package it in with the Gettysburg game, charge a little bit more, charge a little bit of a premium for the game itself, and include a couple of battles in the game rather than just Gettysburg.
You think like a DLC kind of thing?
Maybe, or maybe just include it with the base game. Charge $14.99 for the game and include Gettysburg, P Ridge, and whatever else.
I think honestly they should have look. I understand his point of view where he wants to include a battle where one of his ancestors fought. But honestly, $14.99. I mean, the game is great. I really like the game. $14.99 for P Ridge. I would.
You want to talk about it?
$9.99.
I mean, I know you've been talking about Gettysburg-the-Tide-turns, but do you want to talk a little bit about the game? Because what I will say is Gettysburg-the-Tide-turns is a gorgeous game. The map, and I know people are going to say, oh, well, it's just, little blocks moving around a map. Holy crap, they did a wonder with the map of Gettysburg. That is a beautiful, beautiful representation of Gettysburg. It's a map, to be sure, and there's little blocks moving around the map. It's not a 3D game, but if you're trying to say, like, what makes this game, what defines this game, I would say the art style of Gettysburg-the-Tide-turns is the key defining element to that game. And the gameplay is set up so that it complements that to a large degree. I've got a couple of gripes with the fact that it seems like the campaign game has been kind of pushed out the door half-finished, where there's serious, show-stopping bugs with it. I have no doubt that Slitherine and Matrix will get that ironed out, and it will be functioning properly before too long. But why don't you talk a little bit about the game? Because I know this was kind of one of your games that you've been looking at and following, and kind of is you mentioned you were a Kickstarter supporter and were a big supporter of the series to start. So why don't you talk a little bit about the game, how you play it, what's interesting about it, what do you like about it, what don't you like about it, and then I'll kind of jump in. But I think you're a little bit more the expert at it than me, so I'll let you kind of let people know what is Gettysburg-the-Tide-turns.
So, a couple of things that I really like about the game, like you were saying, the map's absolutely gorgeous. Unit counters are really cool. I really like them. Where it separates, like for each brigade, it's kind of like set up, I believe, into regiments, like little specific counters and such. A couple other things I like is the graphics, like when a combat phase is set up, the amount of mixed between the graphical assets of it, like when we're seeing cannons going off and units smashing into each other, mix that with the sound effects, it really immerses you in the game. There's a couple of times like, holy shit, this is incredible. Like you see so much smoke on the battlefield, the sound is kind of like erupting from your computer, and you're like, wow, this feels like an engagement. This feels like two armies slashing into each other, and that was really cool. I really like that part. I'm not crazy about the Chit system, and I'll tell you, one instance that I had a little bit of an issue. Somewhere around, I think, turn 11, I was playing it, and I have the 12th Corps coming in from the east, and I'm barely holding on to Cemetery Ridge and Culp's Hill, and there's like a bend in the line between those two hills, and I'm about to lose it. The Chit shows up onto the Chit allows me to move the 12th Corps, because the Chit system is basically like throwing dice. Whatever the Chit lands on is the unit you're able to move. And so it landed on the 12th Corps. I was able to move the 12th Corps, and by moving the 12th Corps, I got them to solidify the line between the Culp's Hill and Cemetery Ridge. I solidified that line. It was beautiful. Combat erupted in it. The Chit came up. Combat erupted. I pushed back the Confederate units, and for that day, July 1st, I was able to hold both hills. Unfortunately, a bug happened, and it didn't, the next turn wouldn't show up. So I ended the game. I was, and then rebooted it and restored it from the last save. Unfortunately, the Chit system didn't land on the 12th Corps. It landed on the 11th or the 1st Corps. So the Confederates broke between the 1st and 11th Corps. So there was a big hole between, Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. They smashed my forces on Cemetery Hill, so I had to push back the whole line. In essence, I lost day one of Gettysburg. And that's why I feel like the Chit system, I'm not that crazy about it, because it's random. I'm not that crazy about it because it's in one instance, I was able to secure the line. Day one, Gettysburg is fine. Union's holding the positions they need to hold. Because the Chit system decided, we're going to let you move the 1st Corps, not the 12th Corps. I lost the whole first day. And I feel like, I don't know, I understand it's a game, but I feel like I really need to move the 12th Corps. I don't need to move the 1st Corps, and that really it frustrated me a little bit, but everything else was great. I mean, the sound effects were great. The music was good. I think there's only one track of it though, and I think it loops. But I do enjoy the game. The graphics, especially, were really cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I would agree. The game has almost a Ken Burnsian type feel to it with the music that's behind it. The sound effects are great. Just sort of providing some guidance or overview for the game is essentially it's a turn-based game that puts you in command of either the Confederacy or the Union during the Battle of Gettysburg. You've got a wide variety of different scenarios. You can play just July 1st, July 2nd, July 3rd. You can also play just the Confederate attack on the Union left flank at around Little Round Top. A very short scenario, about 3 or 4 turns. You've also got the ability to play just Pickett's Charge on July 3rd, sort of the high watermark of the Confederacy. And you've got the ability to play the Grand Campaign, which is kind of all July 1st through the 3rd. And the game essentially gives the Confederates controls of individual divisions within their forces, and the Union seem to be given control of the core units within their division. So, for example, July 1st in the morning, if you're fighting with the Union, you've got the Cavalry Division under Buford, which is a force you command. You've got the 1st Corps under General Reynolds coming up, and then periodically throughout the day, you'll receive more forces that end up under your command, the 11th Corps, the 12th Corps, and then you move on into July 2nd. The Confederacy starts out with Heath's division of Hill's Corps. We'll end up with Pender's division shortly thereafter, and then you've got Rhodes and Early coming down from the north, and it kind of follows that historical progression. But the Chit system that you were talking about, this is a turn-based strategy game, but what makes it interesting is if you're playing as the Union, the 1st Corps is represented in its brigades. So you've got the Iron Brigade, you've got Cutler's Brigade, you've got all the individual infantry brigades. And the Confederates are the same. They've got individual brigades within the divisions that they play. But what the Chit system basically does is say, okay, the Union's got their 1st Corps, their 11th Corps, their 12th Corps, cavalry brigades under Buford. And then the Confederates have an artillery reserve, Heath's division, Anderson's division, Rhodes' division, Early's, etc. But what the Chit system does is it randomizes who gets to move when. So essentially, it's like a board game in that if you're the Union, and let's say you've got the 1st, the 11th, and the cavalry on the field, and the Confederates have Heath and, we'll say, Pender on the field, what'll happen is you'll both have those units you can draw from, but you've also got a combat phase as well that you can draw from. And these are just like, think about a board game where you're rolling a die to decide who moves when. And you get to move one of those at a time. So you could randomly roll the 11th Corps. Then you get to move all the 11th Corps units. You don't fight, you just move them. And then and then you roll again. And maybe you get the 1st Corps, maybe the Confederates get to roll. Or maybe you land on your combat chit. And if you land on your combat chit, then whatever units are within, adjacent spaces to each other fight, and artillery can bombard. Or again, if you land on another unit, they can move. But what that effectively does is it makes it very difficult to plan your turnout, because you could land on the 1st Corps and move your units around, and then the Confederates land on Heath's division, and you moved your 1st Corps units, assuming you were going to move the 12th Corps in on their right flank. But now, because you randomly rolled the Confederates, now they get to move in, and they actually go around your flank and flank you, and now the next roll is the Confederate combat roll, so before you even have a chance to respond with your 12th Corps or your 11th Corps or other movements to counter the Confederates, because you've just been unlucky with your die rolls, the Confederates have broken your right flank of your 1st Corps. And I know you expressed some frustration with that. I find it fascinating. I find it really interesting. And I think it's very different. It is a board game for computer gamers. I think that's the only way you can think about it, because this whole Chit system is only something that makes sense in the vein of a asynchronous board game where you've got to move things around at different periods of time, and not everything can happen simultaneously, and it's not an I go, we go. It's all right, I'm going to move this here, and then I'm going to move this here, and I'm going to move this here, and, the computer doesn't do it all like that. So yeah. I think it's actually really interesting and different, and I realize it's not, strictly speaking, realistic, but I don't care. I think from a gameplay perspective, it's brilliant.
I agree with you. It feels. I mean, obviously, I mean they designed it as a board game first and moved it to a computer, so it's basically a board computer game, and I really like it. I mean, honestly, for $9.99, I think it's a great deal. You're getting a great Gettysburg game for $9.99, and I really like certain aspects. I mean, I'm not saying I'm against it, like the Chit system. I just sometimes it frustrates me in the example that I just mentioned. But it's I guess probably because I played previous Shenandoah games like Battle of the Bulge and Drive on Moscow, and you were able to move any unit. And I guess I just have to get used to this new type of mechanic where you're only given command of a certain brigade or a certain corps and such like that. The only thing that got me, and I would say, like again with this Chit system was like, I remember like you have, you can move the 12th Corps, 11th Corps, 1st Corps, whatever, and then it has a combat phase, right? There was a couple of times where like I had units on Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, and I didn't want them to attack. I wanted them to like stay where they were, recover stragglers, whatever, the wounded, casualties, whatever, strengthen your position, dig in, whatever you need to do. But when the combat phase comes in, you have no choice but to engage.
Well, to be fair, that's only if you're adjacent to an enemy unit, right? So if your unit is not touching another enemy unit, they won't do anything.
No.
It's only if you're literally up against an enemy unit. I agree with you. That can be frustrating. It's like, darn, I wanted them to rest. But I think that makes you make the decision as a commander. Do you pull them off the line? Do you put them in the rear and don't have them, as an integral part of your flank if you don't want them to be fighting?
But do you feel like when it goes into that combat phase, like if I have troops on Cemetery, on Culp's Hill, right, and it goes into the combat phase, I'm wondering, like, does my position on top of Culp's Hill, are those forces coming down Culp's Hill and attacking Confederates and abandoning the trenches? I mean, what's happening there? Are there even entrenchments in the game? Like, if I keep a position of a brigade on Culp's Hill, I'm assuming in my head, the longer they stay there, they're entrenching, they're resting and such. And then the combat phase comes up, and I'm thinking, like, all right, they're attacking Confederate brigade in front of them. Are they leaving the trenches and attacking Confederate unit? I mean, what's going on there? Or is the Confederates attacking them? I mean, am I losing that entrenchment bonus, or are there even entrenchments to begin with?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's entrenchments. You definitely see bonuses to terrain. So when your troops are located on hills and the enemy isn't, when your troops are located in woods and the enemy are or aren't, all of that influences how combat is resolved. I don't know if there's we're building breastworks piece to it, but there definitely is a component of, the terrain giving you a perk.
Do you feel like, so in terms of like as a desktop game for $9.99, I think it's a great game. And I would love to see future editions, like maybe DLC as Shiloh for $5 and Antietam for $5. I would happily pay the $5 for them. That's not a question. Do you feel like this is going to make its way? I mean, originally it was designed as an iOS game, but do you feel like that might be in the plans for that Slitherine has for the future of this game, or the model of the game engine?
I don't know. I'd like to see him get the grand campaign scenario fixed first. Again, I don't want to harp too much on it, but while I agree the game is worth it, it's worth it if that scenario gets fixed. And I think there's a hot fix somewhere, but in essence, there is a bug right now where you go into the grand campaign and you fight through July 1st, and then between July 1st and 2nd, at some point in those turns there, as you get close to the end of July 1st, you end up having a freeze, as you discussed earlier, that prevents you from being able to move forward at all. So, I know that's being worked on. Assuming that gets fixed, that, I would agree the game is worth the price. I completely forgot what I was saying. What was your question?
No, I was saying that, do you feel like there's a future? I mean, do you feel like they should port this to iOS?
I mean, Shenandoah was originally successful because of their iOS games. I I don't know, though. I don't know if the UI is all that well portable. I suppose it would work. I don't really play a ton of mobile games myself to begin with, though, so it's hard for me to say, like, yeah, I don't really care. I'll play it on my computer. I probably would never play it on my phone, and, whatever they do with it, they do with it. What about you?
I mean, honestly, I feel this game belongs on iOS. It's a great as a desktop game. Don't get me wrong. I really enjoy playing it on my laptop. But as I said, in previous episodes, like I'm always on the go. I'm running from, whether from one place to another, going to Brooklyn, doing all this crazy stuff, going to Gettysburg. So I'm always on the go. I'm not home as much as I would like, and having this on an iPad or an iPhone where, if I'm chilling out with friends and, everybody's having a drink and I could just take out my phone and, just, play a couple of rounds of Gettysburg would be awesome for me on my phone. Would be awesome. And I would really enjoy that. One thing I wanted to ask you is, so like you were saying before, Shenandoah had their start on iOS, on the iPad, and, eventually came out with iPhone games and such for Battle of the Bulge and Drive on Moscow. Where do you think it went wrong? Like, that was the question a lot of people had. It was like they were successful. You had Battle of the Bulge, then Battle of the Bulge was really successful. They came out with Drive on Moscow. That was successful. Then it came out with, there was a desert, I forgot the name of the game, but it was a desert, the campaign in Africa during, I think, 1942 or 43. So they were coming out with hits. So I don't understand where, the company started struggling. I mean, where can you see that everything kind of, didn't go right? Like, where do you think it was like a misstep?
I'm not sure. I mean, I think you know more about what went wrong with them. And for those of you who don't know, Shenandoah Studios, the developer of Gettysburg-the-Tide-Turns, was an independent studio that developed a series of games that Jean just mentioned that seemed to be very successful on iOS. And were strategy games looking at World War II predominantly, which... again, in the strategy game world, seem to be doing well. I guess the one thing I wonder about is, I know you did an interview with them for your Wargamers podcast, and I remember seeing you go through their studios, and there were, like 7 or 8 or 9 guys there? Yeah. It was a relatively large team, and I wonder, there certainly are games that can get away with having large development teams, maybe even massive development teams, like Clash of Clans, where they're making like $1 million a day. But if you were to say, what's a cheap developer? Like, I don't know any programmers who make less than $50,000 a year. I think most make substantially more. But let's say you somehow get a group of programmers and artists and developers or whatnot, very, very talented people who could go on to jobs and other companies and other organizations and, make substantially more money. And they agree to take a $50,000 salary to work for Shenandoah Studios. And you turn around and you sell your game. Let's say you have a team of 8 of them. You've got to sell 80,000 copies just to break even on 1 year of your payroll for 8 people. If you're selling it for like $4.99, if you're selling it for $9.99, you've got to, it's half that. You got to sell 40,000 copies. But how many copies of a game are you going to sell in iOS at $9.99?
I think it was originally selling at $9.99, I believe,
okay,
right?
Fair enough. Let's say you're selling it at $9.99. So to pay for your team of 8 people, you've got to sell 40,000 copies. How many people out there are going to buy a strategy game on iOS, first of all? Second of all, how many of those people are going to pay $10 for a game up front? We all know the free-to-play model is huge in mobile. We all know there's a ton of games and options out there. We know people have no issue paying microtransactions. I think the issue is there's not 500,000 people out there. Probably, I'm assuming, I could be wrong, they're going to turn around and buy a game for $10 on iOS.
I think and I agree with you on that. I mean, I think originally in correct me if I'm wrong, I remember Battle of the Bulge came out in like between 2010 and 2012, so somewhere around there. I'm not exactly correct on the year, but somewhere around that Battle of the Bulge came out. And then you have Drive on Moscow. And I feel around that time frame, the App Store was still thriving. And And I remember talking, to a lot of people in the industry, and I was in the industry at that time, and talking to dozens of developers, on a regular basis, and every time I was talking to them, I was just saying, yeah, everything's going great. We're getting, we're making good money. But somewhere around, I think it was at 2013, somewhere to 2015, the App Store and the whole app market started changing. It was going to that free-to-play model. People were saying, I've run into a lot of people that were more like, I'm not going to pay $5, or I'm not going to pay $10, or I'm not going to pay $20 for a game. There were more and more people saying, I'm not willing to spend that much money for an app or a game and such. And the free-to-play model kind of kept rising. And a couple of people I've been talking to recently, developer-wise, they were saying how they're going to have to release their game more for a low cost or free play model, and then start releasing in-app purchases to make the money back for the development process. So I'm thinking the only reason, my personal opinion on why everything didn't work out so well was primarily because the entire app store market kind of changed between 2010 and 2017, where developers were having a hard time to, charge, like you were saying, $10 for a game. People are not willing to spend $10 for a game, or $10 for any kind of app. I mean, today you run into people that are not cool with spending 99 cents for an app. So I feel like that probably, I don't know if it was the complete reason, but I feel like that maybe contributed to Shenandoah Studios having difficulties.
I'd agree with that. I think, I also wonder, when we say they were being really successful, what does that really mean? Because I think everyone knows they weren't, it wasn't Clash of Clans or Fruit Ninja, or I don't know, whatever the other big, iOS game success levels are. But, successful for a strategy game on PC is, you sell 50,000 copies of a strategy game on a PC, you're doing all right. You sell that at the amount you're selling it for on iOS, and great, you paid 8 guys' salaries over a year and a half. But I think the issue is also that, I would assume, and again, I don't want to speculate too much because I wasn't in the room. I didn't see their financial books. I don't know what else was going on. But I would assume they were kind of in one of those scenarios where, great, we're doing fine, sold a game, sold well, great, another game came out, did well, did fine. But as soon as you start having one of those games where things start dragging, and you don't have that new game out, you don't have that new hit out, you don't have that new revenue out, things can get rough really quick. Bills can pile up really quick, and it's a hit-based world. You need a game constantly coming out every single year in order to keep that cash flow coming through. And, again, if there was delays with, Gettysburg-the-Tide-Turns or, other games, or one of them didn't do very well, and, I think the other piece is to get the games at the quality that people are willing to spend that amount of money on mobile, you need to have a really high quality experience. Well, to do that, you need a lot of talented people working on your team. Well, a lot of talented people equals a lot of bills. So I think it's, a combination of things.
Well, I hope the future of this, they put considerable effort, at least I believe around 3 years. Slitherine put around 3 years of development process into developing this game, and I hope they continue using the engine with NTM. I would love to see an NTM game, and or a Shiloh. I really would love to see a Shiloh game based on this engine. That would be kind of cool. So I hope there's a future in it. I would hate to see Gettysburg-the-Tide-turns, and that's it.
Yeah, I agree. I think a future would be interesting. I would almost rather see other battles that are more meeting engagement type fights occur. I'm not sure how well this would fit to a static fight. I mean, you could do it for sure. July 2nd is that. But I almost think that Gettysburg is this unique sort of meeting engagement where, a lot of things work there that almost to the perfect level of this is a battle that was fought with a wargamer's dream laid out in front of it, where it slowly escalates as more and more troops become available, as you get to know the game a little bit better, as you become more talented. I don't think static engagements where one side is purely on the defensive and the other side is all already entrenched necessarily flow all that well for this kind of game, but there's certainly other battles that would work well. Shiloh might be interesting, as you've kind of got more and more troops that come to your disposal. You could isolate certain parts of the battlefield. I was thinking something more along the lines of like Quatre Bras and Waterloo as being like an interesting look at maybe where this system could go. Because I don't think you really see in this kind of a game with this level of abstraction when you're pulled out from the tactical level of the battle, I don't really think you've got to worry too much about the complexities of squares and other Napoleonic components in the way that you would have to in a actual tactical representation of the battlefield in 3D or anything like that. So it could be interesting.
Yeah, I didn't even consider, Foreign Wars. Waterloo would be a really cool engagement. I would really love to see. That would be really cool for an engine like this. I really would love to see Waterloo.
I think some Revolutionary War battles could fit well as well, because I don't think you're tied into needing a huge scale for the battle. You could always shrink the unit size down to regiment or battalion or something like that and fight out a Rev War battle as well.
Oh, yeah, I would love that, yeah. But talking about, going back to iOS, since we were talking about moving Gettysburg to iOS, I got to talk to Johan Nagel of Every Single Soldier, and we were talking about how he's bringing Carrier Deck and the Afghanistan 11 to iOS, and Afghanistan 11. I don't know if you guys. I did an interview with him a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about how he's bringing Carrier Deck and Afghanistan 11 to iOS, and Carrier Deck is, I believe, coming out very shortly. I think in the next few weeks, and then Afghanistan 11 is coming out on iOS. I believe within this year. He was mentioning.
Carrier Deck could do well on iOS. I think that's the kind of game that would work well there.
Yeah, and he was showing during the interview. I mean, if you guys, it's on my page, but he was showing the video on the video. He was showing Carrier Deck was already working on iOS. I mean, he was going through the gameplay, so it looks like it's imminent release. And he was saying how Afghanistan 11 is already coming to iOS. And he actually unveiled a whole bunch of DLCs that's coming out on that's going to parallel after Afghanistan 11. But going back to iOS is the one thing that I kind of miss was back in the day, 2010, 2011, whatever it was, and early in the midlife of the App Store, we were getting tons of strategy games on iOS. There was a new strategy game coming out almost to the point of every week. I remember when I was in Apple, it was they were doing a couple of people I knew. They were doing had to review thousands of apps per week. And I feel like that's been decreasing now, to the point where we get maybe a few strategy games a year now on iOS. And I don't know. I'm always kind of hopeful because I really love playing strategy games on the go. And I know a lot of our audience plays it on the laptop and their desktop, but I feel like mobile is kind of the future, and the people I talk to, developers and publishers, they're seeing the reports and the way the industry is going is it's not going that way because the economy is not proving a great how do I say, not resource, but it's not proving, illustrative for them to invest in there as much as it was back in the day. And I don't know if they have to redevelop the models on how to appeal people to play strategy games on tablets or phones. But I honestly believe, what Steve Jobs said back in 2010 during his All Things D conference, that, people that phones and tablets are going to be like cars. Majority of people are going to have cars. And laptops and desktops are still going to be around, but they're going to be more like trucks. One out of so many people are going to have to use those. And I feel he's right on that, because you could see, phones have, flooded the market and such, and tablets, a lot of people have tablets nowadays. And I feel like, honestly, that's the way to go, because, we live in a world where everybody's on the go, and, you get up at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, you're not home until 8 o'clock. And when you get home at 8 o'clock and have to spend some quality time with the family, and, you don't get as much time as you did back in the day to sit down on a laptop or a desktop and play your games. And I hate lugging a laptop with me everywhere I go because, they're usually, if you want to get a gaming laptop, they're usually big and clunky and such. So how do you feel about like strategy games? Like, do you feel like that's where the industry needs to go is the mobile market, or do you feel like for the next 10 years that it's going to live on the desktop and laptop market?
10 years? Oh, good God. I work in an industry where you can't even predict the next 2 years, sometimes not even the next 6 months. So I don't know about 10 years. What I will say is that I think you're being a little bit... I think part of the issue is I don't think strategy games, as they are today, have, in general, user interfaces which translate to a mobile experience. And I think that a mobile experience is a dramatically different experience than we are used to having. And those people who play strategy games and who are interested in strategy games and who want to get into things really don't want to do it within a small screen. They want to do it on a larger screen in front of them where they have a million different windows that they can, scroll into and scroll out of and change a whole bunch of different variables. And I just don't think that mobile is all that well suited to deal with, an incredibly complex user interface. I'm not saying mobile isn't the future, but I don't want strategy game companies investing a ton of money into being, industry leaders in mobile if their consumers aren't ready to be there yet. So, I understand your perspective coming as someone who worked from Apple and someone who's really, mobile and loves playing games on mobile. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't think strategy games are going to be the industry leader in transitioning things over to a mobile environment because the user interface is so complex, because the games themselves are so much more menu driven than sort of visceral 3D image driven. I just don't think there's a good way to do that yet, and maybe some brilliant person will come along and develop a new, intuitive user interface that allows you to do all the things that strategy gamers want to do on your phone. But to this point, the mobile experience and the strategy game experience, unless you're going to simplify things, which some games have done brilliantly, but unless you're going to, take away some of the pieces that a lot of these gamers want, I don't think you're going to get there with a superior user experience. And that's why I think strategy games have kind of lagged behind in that regard. But they're not the only ones. I think first-person shooters, there was sort of a brief foray into it with, I forgot the names, but there were a couple of FPSs that were pretty big on mobile. And then people realized, well, wait a minute, the experience people want with FPSs is a full living room experience with a big TV in front of you. They don't want a tiny, 6-inch screen in front of you that they're playing off of. So I think it depends on the game. I think it depends on the experience the consumer wants, and I'm sure strategy games and technology will get us there at some point, whether it's 10 years, 15 years, 20 years down the road. I don't know. But I don't think we're there, and I don't think we're going to be there in the next year or so, and I don't have a problem with that because I don't want strategy game companies going out of business because they're investing in something that their consumers aren't going to buy.
I agree with you. I believe Marco from Slitherine was saying the same thing. Like, it's the user interface is kind of very limiting when it comes to mobile games. But honestly, like I have a dream. To
well, you may be the Martin Luther King Jr. of strategy games on mobile, but I frankly I know you're always on the go. But I think you're a little bit of an outlier there. Like, I live in a major metropolitan area, so you would think that I would be someone who'd all be over, gaming on mobile or gaming on tablet. But frankly, I'm not. And I don't game ever at work. I don't game ever, during my day. I don't do it till I get home, till I can just kind of chill in front of my monitor, my computer monitor, and just, when I've got time to just kind of wall myself off and think and play and have fun. And, I think that's the majority of gamers to this point. And I think the continued strong sales of consoles and all these other genres of games that predominantly play on console is evidence to that. And I would argue the incredible success of Steam is also evidence to that. Again, if there may be a brilliant developer that comes along and figures out how to put it all together, but to this point, it's like saying, well, you could watch a movie on your phone, but, I'd rather go watch it in my living room with surround sound and a 70-inch TV in that immersive experience. Which one are you going to choose? Which one's the better experience? My 7-inch screen in front of me or the 70-inch TV? I don't have a 70-inch TV, but I'm just using this for illustrative purposes. Or a 70-inch TV in my living room with surround sound all around me. Which one would you rather do? Because right now what you're trying to sell me on is you're trying to sell me that this 5-inch screen in front of me with 2 speakers at the bottom of it, and oh, by the way, the battery might be dead, so I'm going to have to plug it in, and it's going to feel like it's on fire as I'm squinting to see what's in front of me. Is that a better experience than listening to the full immersive experience? I don't think so.
Well, I'll be honest. You guys probably can chase me out of town, but I was watching Star Wars, Force Awakens. No, I'm sorry, Rogue One at the DMV on my iPhone 7 Plus.
I'm not going to judge you. I mean, I was watching Man on the High Castle at my in-laws 3 or 4 months ago on my phone at like 2 a.m. Just like watching on my phone with my headphones on. That's fine. I don't have an issue with that. But I think the question is, what would I prefer? Would I prefer that, or would I prefer to be on my couch? And I think I'd prefer to be on my couch if given the choice.
That's true, yeah. I wanted to ask you, since we were talking about Afghanistan 11, so the interview that I did with Johan Nagel, he had mentioned a couple of things. So I wanted to get your take on it. So he's coming out. He would mention in the interview that he's coming out with a DLC for Afghanistan 11. That's going to come out this year, and I think a little bit in the next year, where he's going to come out with a British DLC, followed by USMC DLC for it, and then probably going to pronounce this incorrectly, but ISIF. And when I was in the military, I remember everybody having the patch for ISIF. I have never asked what the heck it meant, but apparently it's part of the Joint Task Force, I guess, in Afghanistan. But he's planning to release DLC for Afghanistan 11 on that. And then he mentioned that he's going to release more additions to the game, kind of like their own separate kind of thing. After Afghanistan 11, after all these DLCs, he's going to come out with, using the same engine, Angola 86, which I'm not very familiar with that conflict. And then a Soviet-Afghan war, followed up by a complete redesign of the Vietnam game using a redesigned Afghanistan 11 engine. So I wanted to get your take on, when he was telling me this, I was really motivated because playing the Soviet-Afghan war sounds incredible, because that's a great conflict for guerrilla warfare.
First of all, ISAF stands for the International Security Assistance Force.
Ah, okay. I should have probably known that.
It was established by the UN Security Council to help assist the Karzai administration and provide basic security.
You're reading off Wikipedia, aren't you?
Shut up. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think that the coin engine. And I know coin is kind of there's a coin engine for board games, which is something different. But I think that the coin engine, looking at the way that he's designed it, is intriguing. I don't know if I want to revisit Vietnam. I find myself wanting a more theater feel to it. I would love that kind of a game, but I want a little bit more. I want something that makes me feel like I'm in Vietnam, and I don't know if the Vietnam game did that in the way that, I want to know where I am in Vietnam. I want to know what impact I'm having on the overall war in Vietnam. I want to know, I'm calling in more troops from the States, but give me a damn map of the actual country, and don't give me just this tiny little subset of it. If you're going to penalize me for calling in reinforcements from the States, then I better feel like I'm actually in South Vietnam. And I don't know if I do. I think the conflict feels authentic, but but I don't know if the ambiance is all the way there. With that being said, I do think Afghanistan 11 does a very good job. I do enjoy the game. I'd be curious to see what really USMC and British are really going to do. Is it just unit? Is it just like, all right, it's a unit pack? Like, all right, I'm buying USMC infantry skins and British infantry skins with a few scenarios, or what's... I'm kind of curious to see what's next. I think he's done a good job with all of these games, and I'm interested to see what's next. I wouldn't color myself super excited just because I'm a little bit skeptical when you say, like, oh, we're adding the British and we're adding the Marines, and it's like, okay, so you're going to make me pay to have a little image on the screen that looks like a Marine rather than just a generic infantryman. Okay.
That with like the British, like one feature he was going to add, like in the game, if you're moving a force into like a town, they have to, I believe, come off their helicopter or come off their, Humvees, and then go into the town, I think on foot, something like this. And then with the British, because they're more diplomatic than, I guess he was saying diplomatic or more, diplomatic. They can
really. That feels forced. I'm sorry. That just feels forced. I need to research the conflict more. Maybe there's a very valid reason to have that interpretation, but it just feels like a gameplay mechanic you're introducing so you can sell something, and that's fine. I mean, I don't have an issue with him building out the game and making it a little bit more in depth. And I've enjoyed the hell out of Afghanistan 11. Vietnam 65 was great. I want to see more games about that. The Angola decision is interesting. It seems like, does he work for Graviteam or something? Because like they're the only other game developer I've ever seen look at that conflict. I'd be curious to see what an Iran-Iraq conflict would look like. Like that would be something I'd love to see him tackle. But I think that would be less coin and more conventional, right? So that probably wouldn't fit his existing model. I think he's doing great work. I enjoy his games. Just a tinge of skepticism with some of the updates to Afghanistan 11, perhaps on my part. But that being said, I still think the game itself as it exists today is very well done. I'd like to see more games, more conflicts modeled in this way. But, I think there'd be maybe looking like the British in, was it Malaya, where they had their counterinsurgency campaign that actually worked and they won. Those kind of things, I think, and adding a little bit more depth around the whole conflict itself would be interesting. And I would be happy to happy to play, the games as they go forward. So I'll be paying attention to it. I'll be interested in it. I'm just, maybe a tinge of hesitancy to jump fully on board some of these next steps. But in general, I'm excited. I look forward to seeing what's next. And I think he's done a really good job in bringing some counterinsurgency conflicts to computer wargaming that just have not been properly modeled to this point.
He was saying that the next he's planning to release 3 games a year, and
that's pretty ambitious. Is it just him, or is there anybody else he's working with?
No, he's actually doing something really cool. Like during the interview, it was a long interview. It was like 40-50 minutes. So like if you watch it, it's pretty long, but it was an awesome interview. I really loved it. I also made it like a highlights video, so you can go through like 6 minutes of it, just in case you don't watch the whole 50 minutes. But he said 3 games a year, but he mentioned that he's designing them, but he's contracting the work out to developers. So he contracted all the work out to developers, and he's from South Africa. So all the developers in South Africa, he has them working on games, and he's actually planning to go to different parts of the country, like US and UK and Europe and stuff, to get more developers, because he plans to release that many games a year. And he was mentioning like the designs for these games. He has multiple designs, and he even mentioned during the interview, he says they won't look or smell like Afghanistan. He has like designs for a game for an 18th century frigate, and then another game for like the parajumpers from the U.S. Military. I believe the Air Force does the parajumpers. He was saying something like the rescue, and only people I knew that do special forces, SF, are rescue or Air Force, I believe, because the ranges that I run into, they don't. I think they're more for operations. But anyway, he was mentioning he was making a game for that. But he says he has like a whole list of like several designs that are completely different from the next. And I was really like struck by it. And he just recently got into gaming because he was mentioning how like majority of his life he was a banker. He was a corporate banker, and like he was just like day in day out he was just dealing with money. And now that he retired, he's just focusing on games that he always wanted to make throughout his life.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
You know, something you said in there made me think, have you seen the sort of the teaser trailer for Burden of Command?
Is that the 2D strategy game where it's like an RPG?
I think so. I mean, it's not coming out till next year, so it's hard to see what it actually will be, but that's a game I really want to keep an eye on because it sort of seems to be combining this 2D tactical war game element with an RPG element of, you're an officer in command of troops and you need to manage your relationships with them and make decisions, that will not only earn the confidence of your troops, but also allow you to, meet the objectives that you've been set by your leaders. So it's something I'm looking forward to. If you're talking about sort of the next step for every single soldier, which is the developer that you were talking about, I'd also be curious to see kind of, this is another game that's on my radar.
Yeah, that was really cool. I thought it was very different, and different as in good, like because it looked really cool. Like it looked like a 2D strategy game, and it was just like I showed the initial gameplay video. I was like, oh, this is just another like of a squad, and you have to take a town or whatever. But there were strategic decisions you have to make, and it says like your motorman has been hurt. What do you plan to do? Do you want to leave him there and continue to attack on the town, or do you want to, have the medic help him out, or send him back to the rear and lose one of the soldiers to escort him there? It kind of changed the way a 2D strategy game would play out, and I really thought that was really cool.
Yeah, no, I'm interested to see what happens with it. Obviously, it's still a little ways away, but maybe around episode 30 we can go ahead and cover it. Assuming we're still around then.
Honestly, I mean, it said like you said, 2018. I wonder how complete this game is. If it's 2018, it's definitely at least 6 months out. So I wonder how much of the game is finished. And I think it's an indie developer, so kind of hesitant when they say 2018. It's kind of like in my ideas, like. Usually when it's kind of like Apple saying it's going to be out in summer 2017, that means the last day of summer or close to it, So I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, when he says 2018, does he mean like December 2018? So it might be quite a ways.
As long as it comes out, frankly, I don't really care. Like I hear you, but it'll come out when it comes out. I just hope they do a good job.
Like the developer always say, it'll be done when it's done.
Yeah. But with that being said, I mean, we've touched on Ultimate General Civil War. We've touched on, the next step for every single soldier. In addition to that, we've touched on Gettysburg-the-Tide-turns and kind of a little bit of a brief sort of discussion around, Burden of Command. Anything else that's going on that you'd like to chat about before we wrap up here?
I guess the only last thing I wanted to mention was I appreciate and I wanted to thank you for recommending Cold Waters. That was really awesome. I actually felt like my first impressions. I actually put the poster for Crimson Tide. I believe that was the name of the movie.
Oh, nice.
And
Gene Hackman and Denzel Washington in Denzel Washington's usual hero savior mode.
Yeah, actually, I embedded certain clips from the movie inside my gameplay video because I couldn't help resist. I literally ended the game. I said, you know what? I'm going to watch that movie right now because, while I was playing the game, I was saying things like, 5-degree down bubble. I have no idea what 5-degree down bubble means. It can mean launch torpedoes. I have no idea, but it sounded really cool.
I'd be curious if that's a thing. I guess I'll have to reach out to, I've got a buddy who's a submariner. I'd have to reach out to ask him, if that's a thing. 5 degrees down on the dive plane would make sense to me, because those the little fins in front of the submarine that help it dive are dive planes. But on the down bubble, that I'm not quite like. That's a little different. I haven't heard that before.
The only thing I had trouble with Cold Waters was there was a lot to remember, like the controls. It was just like you have to go through the tutorial, and you have to kind of memorize the controls because there's so many things you.
I got a little notebook and I wrote them down.
I did.
Nice. No, but I mean it's a good call out. I mean it's definitely a game that takes a little bit of getting used to. It's a little bit arcadey in some ways. I feel like I'm a fighter jet dodging SAMs rather than a submarine dodging torpedoes. But with that being said, it does take a little bit of getting used to. Once you get used to it, the interesting thing to me is how the 84 campaign and the 68 campaign are like two completely different games. The 68 campaign feels more like Silent Hunter. I've got to line up my shots. I've got to remain stealthy. I've got to, do a whole lot of things. And even if I do all that, my weapons suck. So odds are I probably won't accomplish anything. The 84 campaign is very much like, oh, you think someone's over there? Shoot in that general direction. Oh, you just sunk an enemy submarine. Like, the weapons are that much better, which I think is kind of cool. You can see that evolution of, just slightly smart weapons post-World War II into, the dawn of the tech age with super smart weapons and what have you.
Yeah, I noticed that when I was shooting a torpedo, I saw like an Akula-class submarine or whatever it was, and I shot one of the torpedoes out there.
You haven't played Cold Waters. There's no Akulas in the game.
Yeah, you might be right. I was just thinking in my head, I was just like, I got an Akula off the port bow. I was just like, launch dive planes. And, I was getting totally immersed into the game.
This is all a scam. This is all fake reporting. You don't know anything. Do you even know what the game Cold Waters is about?
It was like I felt it was like more of like a World War III kind of scenario, right?
Yeah, I was giving you a hard time.
I don't know, because it was like, I mean, it's a great game. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I really loved it. There were a few things that I wasn't crazy about. Like, obviously, you have to memorize the controls. That was a little bit frustrating, but I should have done what you did, which was get a book and write it down. The only other thing was I didn't get to play the 60 snare. I didn't even know there was a 60 snare. I just chose snares at random. And whatever sounded more dangerous, I just chose that. And I didn't even...
Well, the 68 scenario is definitely more dangerous. But if you're trying to enjoy the game, I would recommend the 84 scenario until you get pretty comfortable with the game.
The torpedoes, I noticed, like when I shot it, it bypassed the... because like by the time the torpedoes got to wherever the enemy ship was, it was in a completely different direction. But it turned around. I was like, wait, my torpedoes... And I was just like, and started turning around and started heading toward the ship. I'm like, what is this, like a smart torpedo or something like that?
Yes, it is. The Mark 48 is a glorious thing.
I was like, holy crap! I thought I had to move. I thought I had to move it, but it was doing everything on its own. I was like, oh, okay, this is. I didn't know if that was.
You can move it yourself if you want, but.
Oh, okay, that's pretty cool. I didn't know that.
But usually, I'm in the process of dodging like 6 incoming enemy torpedoes, so I don't really have time for that.
I honestly didn't even know what to do when like the enemy. So like when the enemy kind of pinged me and they realized where I was trying to figure out should I go silent, so this way they can't detect me, or should I like put on flank speed and fire countermeasures and go crazy with the depths, going up, down, around, firing countermeasures.
Wait for the up down. Wait for the up down and the noisemakers till the enemy actually is. There's a torpedo about to hit you.
Yeah, so like what is your scenario like? So let's say the enemy detects you and they're far off. They're about to launch torpedoes. What do? You go silent?
I might go silent. If they're pinging you, active sonar doesn't really give a damn if you're making noise, right? So it's just pinging a sound wave against your hull. I usually would try and get a layer between them and me if there's one available. So if you go to the conditions tab, you'll see sometimes there's a layer. And what that is there's a difference in temperature in some scenarios between water at different depths. So that actual temperature difference can actually help reflect active sonar waves so they won't hear you, or won't detect you. So not only will that sound different, or that temperature difference prevent them from hearing you because it will distort the sound, but it will also distort active sonar pings as well. So if you can get a layer between you and them, it'll make it harder for you to hear them, but it'll also make it harder for them to hear and find you. If that's not available, then I would just, in general, I stay silent till an enemy torpedo has kind of acquired me. And if it is coming in on me, then I'll crank up the flank speed and kind of start dodging, I don't know, just dodging.
I had a hard time like setting up wave points on there. Like I would love to just like set wave points and then just let the computer do it.
You can wave anytime you want. Just raise your left hand and just kind of twiddle your hand back and forth.
You mean like with the WASD keys?
Sure, why not?
But you know what I would love to see in this game would be an addition DLC with a ballistic missile submarine. I want to be like Gene Hackman with with the counter in my hand and be like fighting against the enemy submarine and trying to launch my ballistic missile submarines.
I'm sure that'll be modded in at some point. I think there's actually some mods already that add like SSGNs, Ohios with cruise missiles instead of nukes. I doubt they'll add boomers themselves, but I'm hoping they add other conflicts or other... I think I've heard rumors like they might do a British DLC that allows you to have like the British subs. I know they're working on a Soviet campaign as well. I don't know if that's DLC or if that's part of the core game. I would love to see a modern day scenario where it's like US versus China. That would be really interesting. But yeah, I mean, this is a game with, I think, a bright future. Seems to be really well received. It's really done very well on my channel. It seems to be something that people really want to watch and see and participate in. I hope there's more. I hope they keep improving it and that it continues to go from there.
Yeah, I recommend this. So, like, if you want a really good submarine game, this is definitely a must-have. I really did enjoy it. I really look forward to those mods, and a boomer kind of scenario would be really cool. Like getting your
there are boomer scenarios. They're just you have to sink enemy boomers rather than you being one.
Oh, okay. Well, I would love to be like, and I'm bringing back the movie again because it would be really awesome. Be like, you have to go silent.
You just love your Lippinzahner stallions, don't you?
Yes. that was really interesting. There's a lot of depth to that conversation between Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman. It was just like, and then especially toward the end of the movie, it was just like when the horses are born, they come out, they're born white, and he says, it's just like, no, they're born black or something like that. And I was just
racism, racist yeah. Gene Hackman burned. Anyway, or racist Gene Hackman gets burned. But yeah, anyway, moving on. So Cold Waters, I think, we could probably dedicate a whole show to that. We've talked about it a little bit. It could be the next Ultimate General Civil War where we allow it to take over our podcast. But with that being said, I think, I'm kind of curious. It's been about an hour and a half, so I don't want to keep people too long and make them too bored with us just rambling back and forth with each other. What are you drinking?
All right. So I was thinking that, all right, so you know me, I have a hard time. I have an addiction. I can't leave the IPA. I've tried. I can't leave it. So I got a whole bunch of IPAs for the...
You're drinking Budweiser.
No, holy shit, no. So I decided to pick up a couple of different beers. So I tried a Highlands Brewing Company IPA, which is North Carolina. It's not too far from where I am. And... it was a pretty good beer. Then I tried a Southern Tier, which is kind of weird because it says Southern Tier double IPA, but it's brewed out of like upstate New York, which is kind of really weird. I'm like, why would they call it Southern Tier? But that was all right. It was a good beer. It was kind of nutty for some reason. I don't know why. It was just like had this nutty aftertaste. So after having those two beers, not unfortunately, but I went back to my old Steady Stallion, my El Wapo from O'Connor's, because out of all the beers I've had, that's my top favorite.
Cool. Well, I am drinking, and it's interesting because you're on the East Coast and I'm in the center of the country, so like a lot of our drinks don't really, I don't have the ability to go pick up, your New York drinks, and which is you're in Norfolk, aren't you?
Yeah, I go back between Norfolk and Brooklyn. So, like, this week I'm going to be in Norfolk probably till Saturday, and then going back to Brooklyn next week because I want to catch a Queen's concert. Queen is touring with some other lead singer, and I wanted to kind of...
Well, clearly, because the defining voice of Queen has been dead for some time.
Although they did make a hologram out of him.
Lovely. Queen is one of the most definitively sounding bands. If you're looking at like the actual Queen when you had Freddie Mercury, I would say that Chris Cornell, or whoever just died recently, he was the lead singer of Audioslave and Soundgarden. He was kind of another one, not at the level of Queen, but certainly another one of those really iconic voices where like you listened to him and you knew who it was. Anyway, with that being said, I am currently drinking Don Q, which is a rum made in Puerto Rico, and I can thank my trip to Puerto Rico last winter for inspiring me to find this brand, which is apparently one of the larger rum brands in the world, but the U.S. doesn't actually. It's hard to find. You've got Bacardi, which is also largely made in Puerto Rico, but then you've got Don Q, which is sort of a local Puerto Rican rum. I'm drinking their signature release single barrel. It's a 2005 limited edition with a bottle number on it as well, which is basically a single barrel, so it's a batch of rum that all came from a single barrel of rum, all the way brewed back in 2005. I believe it was bottled or what have you in 2015. So it's 10 years aged in the barrel, a high quality sipping rum, if you ask me. And Don Q, made in Puerto Rico, what should be the 51st state.
Wow, that's I'm assuming it's delicious.
It is very good.
Wow.
I love putting your drinks to shame, by the way.
So I could try some of that, either the rum or the scotch, and then I'm gonna have to send you some IPA that I highly recommend. Either one from Brooklyn that I always go to, or one from around here.
I just enjoy during our podcast always making you sound like a peasant, as you're like, "Oh, I'm drinking something beer," and it's like, "I'm drinking some fine, aged whiskey or rum from 20 years ago."
Well, the thing is like, I don't know what it is. I used to drink a lot of like.
It's okay, you're a peasant. It's all good.
But honestly, like I loved whiskey and I loved scotch, but I don't know. The last, I would say, like couple of years, I've been just obsessed with like, not particular like generic beer, but I really loved craft beer. I don't know what it is, but it's.
Oh no, I'm just giving you shit. I love craft beer too.
I know, but still, I don't know. I don't know what it is. I feel like. I think we're going through like a craft beer revolution. I feel kind of thing because like everybody in my, when I was at Apple, everybody in my work used to always talk about like craft beer. I tried this one, I tried that one, and I don't remember that happening like 10 years ago when me and my friends went out into the city or Queens or wherever.
I don't know. I mean, there's certainly a lot of craft breweries out there,
Like it's skyrocketing now than it was before?
Maybe. I'm not sure. I mean, I think it's been kind of a constant revolution over the last 30 years. I don't think it's new per se.
Well, whatever they're doing, I mean, I kind of jumped on the bandwagon, and it's just really love the double IPAs. Though there's this one I had in Gettysburg that I've been trying to find. I've been going through the internet, and I had it the one day when they had the Gettysburg reenactment, and the bar was so bloody loud I couldn't freaking hear the waitress. I was like, "What beer is this?" And she said it, and I was just like, "I didn't hear you. Say it again." And she was just like, she said it. I was like, "You know what? Cool, sounds good." And I had it again. And I was just like,
bloody loud. Are you British, or am I talking to?
No, but it was just like. I guess my aunt always says that, and I put up on it. But
again, I'm just giving you shit, dude.
But I mean, I'm literally have to like tomorrow. I have to like I did all this research today to try to find out like what kind of beer they're selling. I couldn't find it, so I have to give them a call tomorrow because this IPA has been on my mind. Like every single beer I had since the Gettysburg reenactment, it's just like, yeah, it's good. It's not that double IPA good.
Was it one of those experience drinks or foods though? Like I feel like they're in certain circumstances. Like let's say you've been out in 100-degree heat and no liquid, no water, nothing to nourish you, not a single item of food to eat, and all of a sudden you end up in a pub in the middle of nowhere, and they serve you this food, and it's the best meal you've ever had in your whole life. But really, it's not.
I love the way you're doing your voice there.
But it's really not that great.
Yeah, you're right about that. That could be it, because, like, I mean, I was out on the freaking battlefield for like 3 hours. I was like a freaking lobster. I mean, I'm sure if they served me Miller Lite, it would have tasted like a freaking golden goblet, you know?
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of where I'm wondering is like there's nothing wrong with that. I mean there's a certain mystique and reminiscence to that kind of an experience, but it's also one of those things where it's like if you were back in that scenario and it's like you're back in that bar, you might not want to order that because it could ruin that experience, that history, that feeling for you, right?
Oh man, I'm hoping it's not. I'm gonna find it out tomorrow. I'm gonna order that 6-pack from that brewery. I believe she said. And the only thing I got from that conversation with her, because I was screaming, I was like, "What fracking brewery?" And she was saying something in
like Battlestar Galactica.
Exactly. But like she said some kind of brewery in what's the capital of Pennsylvania? Harrisburg. And she said Harrisburg. That's the only thing I got from that conversation. So some kind of brewery in Harrisburg that I have to freaking call up, send me a 6-pack so I can get it done. And hopefully I can give you a good review on then episode 16 and say, I found the beer I want to die with. I want this in my casket.
All right. Well, now that we've got that clear goal of episode 16 to move forward with, I think we probably should wrap it up. It's been about an hour and 40 minutes, and I'm starting to get weird. So we should probably wrap this episode up. This is another one of those general episodes talking about a whole bunch of different topics, but hopefully we'll be a little bit more regular now that we've kind of started getting things going again. So I know I've really been enjoying this. I've enjoyed this episode. I want to thank everybody for tuning in for 15 episodes now, and I hope you guys have enjoyed everything so far. Please, as usual, feel free to leave us reviews on iTunes. That does help us out a lot. And also comments or thoughts, or feel free to email us at singlemaltstrategy at gmail.com. All of the blah, blah, blah.
IPA recommendations.
IPA recommendations would be welcomed as well. Take into account that Jean is out east and I'm in the center of the country in God's time zone. But I will leave it there and I'll let you send us out, John.
All right, guys. We'll catch you in the next one. See you then.